As individuals, we have been too willing to be taught and led when what is really out there to blow your mind is not some regurgitation of previously achieved conclusions, but experience. The world is far weirder than the maddest among us suppose. You know, the guy gibbering in the stairwell and excreting in your window box. It's better than he can suppose. And the key to understanding this is not brainless gullibility. I mean, if you're just brainlessly gullible and buy into everything which comes down the pike, then the world is stranger than you can suppose, and you don't even have to leave your apartment. But what's interesting is you can be hard-nosed. You can be a rationalist. You can be a show-me kind of person. You can be from Missouri, and you can still satisfy yourself that the world is freakish beyond the wildest imaginings of George Bush or even Billy Clinton. And the key to doing this is to push the edges. We shouldn't huddle together in cities around activities sanctioned by the great corporations that have done so much for us. We should break out, go to the edge, and I know there are many edges in theory: sexuality, drugs, travel. There must be others. Art appreciation. After all, it doesn't all have to be sweat and tumble, you know. And some of these work better than others for some people. I mean, for some people, sex is no big deal. For some people, travel is no big deal. Terrible pain in the neck. They have to fly to Paris. They can't stand it. For some people, psychedelics are no big deal. I mean, don't ask me how they manage that. I assume they're either not taking enough or anything. But maybe there are people who find Paris boring and can turn away from Squirm as well. I don't know. On my agenda, these were the things that worked: sexuality, psychedelic drugs, and travel. Because they break patterns, because they inject novelty. And, you know, travel is great and sex is a wonderful domestic activity. But psychedelics hold the key in this domain of absolutely astonishing you until you're just gasping for breath and flopping around on the ground. I mean, when was the last time that you were actually sick with amazement? You know, I mean, when was the last time you were actually white with sheer terror? Probably, unless you've been caught in automobile accidents or landslides, it was a psychedelic experience. Because these things deliver authentic emotion, authentic data. And the bum bit of history is that it depotentiates human individuals. Just in order to live inside a historical society, you have to sculpt yourself down and down and down. You mustn't be in other people's face. You mustn't thrust your ethnicity or your gender or your tattoo or whatever it is too. You mustn't flaunt. Everything is confined. This is the attitude of history. It's what's called being part of the public. The public is a concept that was created in the Renaissance. It was created by print. There never before was that notion. It's something necessary for democracies to do business. There has to be a public. But when we identify with the public, we essentially become creatures of the herd. Eccentricity is mitigated against. That's why this very small flute theme called bohemianism just will not die in Western civilization. No, it's always been there. It was there before rave, before punk, before rock and roll, before jazz, before the Impressionists, before the Romantics, back. There was always this strain of dissent because it's the lifeline of sanity in Western society. And every time the bastions of bullshittery grow weak, the bohemian thread expands its options, offers itself as an alternative. And I don't think this is an eternal dance of frustration. I think eventually this archaic return, which is what this bohemian thing has always represented, will be felt, will be heard. We have very little time now. If I believed that salvation had to come from political institutions, I would just throw up my hands in despair. It's very hard for people sometimes to figure out whether I'm an optimist or not. Let's get something straight here. I am the most optimistic person you have ever met. I'm absolutely convinced that there is nothing wrong, and that nothing can go wrong, and that nothing will go wrong, and that if something needs to be done, you will find yourself doing it. Now, all purveyors of this kind of goody two-shoes point of view have to then come to terms with, well, then how come the world is such a terrible place? Well, it's a terrible place because it is an interference pattern composed of many times and many places. And there is no peace until the end. There is no let-up in pressure until the end. As we approach the transcendental object at the end of time, history moves faster and faster. We have been approaching this transcendental object since before there was a we to speak of in human terms. In other words, this is the same attractor that pulled life out of the oceans, caused primates to stand on their hind legs, and so forth and so on. But obviously, pick a number, about 20,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, the process quickened. We turned the corner. Everything began to move faster. And again, at the fall of Rome, faster. And again, in the 20th century, faster. Well, nobody has drawn the obvious conclusion from this. If we're going faster and faster, then hell, we're going to get somewhere pretty soon. And that's where I think we are. We can hardly go any faster without the speed of our acceleration passing into the domains of humanly cognizable time. In other words, the reason things are getting weirder and weirder is because the space-time continuum itself is accelerating. It's entirely possible that the last half of the life of the universe will happen in about 3% of the total life of the universe. Nobody said that it has to take as long going down as it took to come up. It may be that the coming up took a long time, and the going down can be catastrophic, sudden, unexpected, dynamic, we say. And that's why I take and I return to this theme, because I return to all things. But I return to this theme now, that history is an anticipation. History is the last call that the train is leaving the station, and the call echoes back to Çatalhöyük and slightly beyond. But in our own lifetime, it's now palpable. all you have to do is close your eyes in a quiet place, twist up a bomber, think, and you will behold the transcendental object at the end of time. You can feel it informing your own life. I mean, you spend a good deal of time denying it because rationalists tell you you're either losing your mind or it's impossible and it can't be happening. But this sense of plottedness, of connectedness, this sense that we are all in a universal drama playing to a close, this sense that we are larger than ourselves, that we are somehow characters on a stage. This is a phenomenon of the light at eventide. This is a phenomenon of the final moments of the cosmic drama. And I think it's tremendously exciting. I think this is what nature set about 700 million years ago on this planet. That it's not about chipmunk after chipmunk after chipmunk for eon after eon after eon. I mean, a little of that goes a long ways. I'm sure you'll agree with me. That's all very fine. But the way nature works is she builds upon her complexity. Having achieved one level of complexity, it sinks into the background and becomes the platform for yet further complexity. So out of molecules comes life. Out of life comes climaxed ecosystems. Out of those ecosystems, higher animals. Out of higher animals, human beings. Out of human beings, technologically motivated human beings. And out of them, something which we can barely imagine. And many of us don't even want to try. We can feel that we're more than animal. We have this dimension, which we call spiritual, and some of us buy into some off-the-shelf explanation. Catholicism, Mormonism, Jainism, something like that. Others of us wrestle with it, or we smorgasbord it into, a little Kabbalah, Taoism, a little Tantra, a little Hasidism. It doesn't matter, do that. But whatever it is, we wrestle with this part of ourselves which cannot be simply dismissed as monkey meat. And I think that it is the soul, that the soul is actually an entity in history seeking to be born, and that the enterprise of history is the creation of the collectivity as an eternal, indestructible, trans-dimensional object of some sort, the tool at the end of time. I've quoted probably to you before this thing from Yeats about once out of nature I would be a thing of gold and enameling, set to sing before the lords and ladies of Byzantium of what has been and what will be. In other words, out of organic existence comes something not exactly inorganic, but not exactly organic, a mechanical nightingale fit to sing before the emperor of Byzantium. This is what the flying saucer is, in my estimation. It's nothing more than an organometallic projection of the future state of the human soul. We are literally like caterpillars or the components of a slime mold. We are undergoing a series of chemical signals and transductions of change that are preparing us to become unimaginable to ourselves. And there's no way out. The only place in nature where you see this is with caterpillars on limited food plants, where the caterpillars eat without a thought in their minds until there's nothing left. And then they go into shock from hunger, and they begin to spin. and their enzyme systems go crazy, and hundreds of genes are suppressed, and thousands of genes are turned on simultaneously. And lo and behold, the caterpillar changes into something completely different, an organism of a completely different order. I have never heard a Darwinian evolutionary biologist explain how gradual evolution could get you the coordination of thousands of genes required in that process. Be that as it may, that is what we're involved in. And the enzymatic juice of this process is technology. And, if when I say technology, you think of D9 caterpillars and freeways and stuff like that, then you're driving using your rearview mirror. By technology, I mean steam engines that you can put 50 inside a human hair. Some of you may have seen the cover of Science News a year ago. 10,000 steam engines on a chip, 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter in diameter. More steam engines on that friggin' chip than there were in England in 1850. Imagine that. Technology simply means the extensions of the human mind into matter. And we do this when we engineer vaccines, when we micro-engineer computer chips. The most advanced now are not even designed by human beings. Human beings dictate the design parameters, and computers solve the architectonic problems and then etch the chips without ever consulting with a human being. This is going on all around us. I don't find it frightening. I find it very reassuring. Remember back in the 1950s, those of you who were born then, how there used to be this persistent fantasy that in the future the world will be run by machines? The people who were saying this, the implication was it must have been wrested then from the hands of assholes at some point. Because, machines, impartial, patient, fair, no bias of gender, race, or creed. It doesn't sound so bad to me. I mean, you want to talk about reestablishing connection, guy and mind. What do you think these computers are made of? They're made out of the earth. They're made out of silicon, glass, gold, silver, lead, arsenic. It reads like the alchemist's cookbook. It's a direct return to the world of the elemental electrons, a direct connecting back into the Gaian body. And it's very funny for me to talk about it and for you to listen about it, because it's a private thing for each one of us. There's nobody who can explain it to you, really, except yourself and your friends. All the metaphors being handed down from the top are bogus, because the people at the top, they don't know what is going on. They have to pay guys tails just to turn on the machines in the morning. They are so deeply in our hands that it brings a tear to my eye to even think about it. And so it's very important to be gentle with people, and this could almost serve as a final point